In this video, we'll learn how to use array methods and properties in p5js. Both of these things are built into the JavaScript language itself, so they're not exclusive to p5js. That means if we want info about array methods or array properties, we need to look at the JavaScript reference and not the p5js reference. So I'm here on the W3 Schools JavaScript array reference page. It's a great place to go for information about array properties and array methods. In a nutshell, array properties are values or qualities that describe an array, while methods are functions that are specific to arrays that help us to do things to the array. Things like sorting, manipulating, editing, or otherwise managing an array variable. So you can see this list is pretty long. I want to take a look at push, and I can see from the description, this helps us to add a new element to the end of an array. It also returns the new length. For any of these, if I want more information, I'll just click on them. And here I can see an example and even an interactive demo of how any of these methods work. So we'll take a look at push. We'll also take a look at shift, which helps us to remove the first element of an array and return that element. So let's jump into P5. So here's the code that we left off with at the end of the using arrays with loops video. So you can see here, this for loop is accessing the length property of my points array to figure out how many times we need to loop over that array to show all of these shapes on screen. Now I'm also making use of this array method called join to print out all the elements in my array into the console. That gives me a visual idea of what information is contained inside my array. I've already got a little bit of interaction here. So I've got this mouse pressed function that is pointing at the third element in my points array and adjusting the horizontal or X coordinate. So every time I click, that specific element is moving across the screen. So in this case, I'd like something a little bit different. I'm going to comment out that mouse pressed function, and instead I'd like a mouse dragged function. So my thinking here is I'd like some interaction where I can track the location of the mouse on the screen and use that to manipulate my existing array of screen locations. So my first step here, I want to use that array push method to add some new locations to my point array. So I'll start just by typing the name of my array variable. So this is really important when you're using an array method. You always need to apply it to a specific array variable. Then we're going to use this dot syntax to call out the specific method that we'd like to use. So in this case, it's push. So I'm saying point array dot push. Then we do open and close parentheses. And inside those parentheses, we're going to add an argument. So just like standalone functions, methods often have arguments that go along with them. And in this case, I need to tell JavaScript what I'd like to add to my point array. And I'm going to use a format real similar to what we're doing up here in the setup block, where we're adding a new array as an element. So that lets me add one new location to the array every time the mouse is dragged. So inside those parentheses, I'll type new, then my array constructor, and inside of that, I'll add the mouse X and mouse Y positions separated by a comma. So now when I drag the mouse, I'm using that push method and applying it specifically to the point array variable to add a new location, which is going to be wherever the mouse happens to be. So I should be able to come to the canvas, click and drag, and you can see I'm getting new shapes on screen. And that's because we're adding new points to that array. And then in our draw block, we're using a loop to automatically cycle through every element in that array, regardless of how long it is. So you can see here pretty quickly things are getting fairly dense. So I'd like to use another method to limit the number of elements that I keep track of in my points array. So let's come back to our mouse dragged function, and I'm going to bring up another method and apply it to that array. So again, we're always doing an array method with that dot syntax applied to an array variable. And this time we're calling shift, and shift does not have any arguments. All it does is remove the first element in an array. So every time we drag the mouse, we're going to remove the first element in the array, and then we're going to add a new element to the end. And we'll see some interesting behavior when we click and drag here, which is that I get a trail following the mouse. And that's because every time I drag the mouse, I'm adding a new location where the mouse is after removing the oldest one, which is probably going to be farthest away from the mouse. So that's an overview of using array methods and properties in p5js.